Welcome to our session focusing on contextual factors as moderators. I'm Jill Filene, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. I am the Executive Vice President at James Bell Associates and work on a variety of home visit research, evaluation, and technical assistance projects, and I'm part of HARC's leadership team. So today we're going to have two presentations. Each presenter will present for 20 minutes and then quickly respond to any urgent questions at the end of their presentation. Following the presentations, we'll have about 20 minutes for question and answer and discussion. So please go ahead and use the chat to enter any questions you have for our presenters. So our first presentation will be led by Kie Kanda. She is a PhD candidate at the School of Nursing and Midwifery at Western University and Translational Research and Social Innovation Group at the Ingham Institute in Australia. Her PhD research focuses on the quality of care and the delivery of maternal and early childhood sustained home visiting program. She is presenting findings from her study focusing on the relationship between customized care and client outcomes. The second presentation will be led by Nicole Knighty. Nicole is a maternal and child health epidemiologist and assistant professor at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. Her research program is focused on understanding the intergenerational effects of maternal adverse childhood events, perinatal mental health, and maternal substance use through patient-engaged research. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball to Kia for the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Jill, for your kind introduction. I'd like to share my slides. I hope you can see my first slide. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, so hello, everyone. So my name is Kie Kanda. I'm joining this meeting from Sydney today. I'm feeling very honored and happy to present our study, which investigated if customized care improves parent satisfaction and enablement in sustained home visiting for mothers and children experiencing adversity. I'd like to acknowledge other authors, Stacey Blaze, Rebecca Grace, Emma and Colby, and Lynn Kemp. My supervisor, Lynn, is with us today. So first, I'd like to start with a brief explanation about the MECSH program. It stands for Maternal Early Childhood Sustained Home Visiting Program. It's a structured program of sustained nurse home visiting from pregnancy to child age 2 for families in need of extra support and at risk of poor maternal and child health and development outcomes. The service is delivered by university-trained registered nurses with the postgraduate training in child and family health nursing. As this figure shows, the program is comprehensive, including core healthy child program areas of supporting mother, child and family health and well-being, family social relationship, and additional support in response to need. So it includes 25 scheduled home visits, group activities, and engagement with other services and support. As shown in this right box, the previous research evidence shows that the MECSH program is effective for improved maternal confidence in parenting, positive child health and development, creating positive home environment, and so on. There is strong evidence for the program's effectiveness. However, the mechanism of effective care that achieve high quality of care are unknown. The quality is achieved by identifying the core ingredients and variations. There are two types of variations. The first one is a purposeful variation, which is made intentionally by nurses in response to client risks, needs, and preferences. On the other hand, non-purposeful variation happens regardless of client needs, which threatens the program fidelity and quality of care. I believe achieving the appropriate balance between program fidelity and purposeful variation to meet individual needs underpins the theoretical concept of precision home visiting. Fidelity to the program's core ingredients is critical for effective program implementation, Meanwhile, purpose-free made evaluations are also equally important for providing client-centered and a customized care in practice. Thus, the MESH program allows nurses to customize the care purpose-free for mothers and families. However, evaluations and customizations in care have not been investigated. Thus, our previous study, which was conducted prior to this current study, looked into the different types of variations in care, which are purposeful and non-purposeful, and if those variations were made based on identified mother's risk and needs. Here are some key findings from the previous study. It confirmed that the MESH-based program had high compliance with the scheduled content, and the visit content was carefully chosen by nurses based on the child development and mother's risks and needs. It's indicated that nurses are more hesitant to provide interventions in response to domestic violence and drugs and alcohol issues than smoking and mental health issues. With evidence base from our previous study, we conducted this current study to see if these variations in care, in other words, the appropriately customized care, are associated with key client outcomes. There were 3 aims. First, to identify the level of satisfaction with the care provided and parent enablement. Second, to examine the relationship between sociodemographic characteristics and parent satisfaction and enablement. Third, to examine the relationship between customized care in response to mother's risk factors and parent satisfaction and enablement in the delivery of a MESH-based program. Here, I'd like to share why we focused on customized care and parent satisfaction and enablement in this research. So previous research evidence indicated that purposeful variation was associated with higher program retention. Nurses in a high retention rate site customized and adapted the program to clients' needs, and they were less directive and more collaborative. The flexible style of practice was more appreciated by mothers, particularly with high risks. Apart from retention and engagement, 2 other key outcome measures are client satisfaction and enablement. Client satisfaction is defined as a healthcare recipient satisfaction with salient aspects of the context, process, and the service experience. Client enablement is defined as a client's ability to understand and manage their health and life. These 2 outcomes provide insightful measures of client perceptions of the care process and their sense of empowerment resulting from increased knowledge and improved capacity for managing health and well-being. Furthermore, previous research indicated that client satisfaction is related to engagement, retention, and compression. It's critically important to understand the role of customized care on key client outcomes, particularly parent satisfaction and enablement. So this study analyzed the data collected in the MESH-based program called Right at Home program, which was a randomized control trial in 2 states in Australia, Victoria and Tasmania. Eligibility criteria were less than 37 weeks pregnancy, having sufficient English, and 2 or more of 10 sociodemographic risk factors such as younger pregnancy, no compression of secondary level education. 352 women in the intervention arm were included in the analysis. Measures in this study were socio-demographic data, risk factors of families, and customized care. Outcome measures were parent satisfaction, which was assessed using the modified short form of Patient Satisfaction Questionnaire, PSQ, as well as enablement, which was measured using the modified Patient Enablement Index. With regard to customized care measure, we identified it from the presence of mother's risks and a provision of care to prevent adverse outcomes from the risks by using the nurse-recorded activity checklist. First, the existence of 4 risk factors, which are smoking, mental health, domestic violence, and drugs and alcohol, were identified by using the data collected at the commencement of the program and the information disclosed by family during the course of home visit. We considered that the mother received appropriately customized care based on the presence or absence of risk factors if at least one episode of care content related to her risk factors was or was not provided to her. So mothers were categorized into 2 groups. The first one is the mother who received appropriately customized care, which is a combination of A and B, A with risk factor with intervention, and D without risk factor without intervention. And another is the group who received inappropriately customized care, which is a combination of B and C, circled in red color. So B is with risk factor, but without intervention. And the C is without risk factor, but with intervention. So now I move on to the key result. So of the 352 women who commenced the intervention, 304, which is 86% of women, completed the program when child reached 2 years old. Of 304 women, 261 and 265 women completed the PSQ and PEI questionnaires at the child age 2 years. As shown in this table, overall result indicated high levels of satisfaction with the care provided, with a mean PSQ score of 44.8. Only one response was at the level of concern, which is score less than 20. The mean PEI score was 4.3, and 43% of participants rated that they felt more enabled by the services. This table shows the total PSQ and PEI scores by socio-demographic characteristics. Mothers who spoke a language other than English at home and those who had never had employment before had significantly lower PSQ scores than those who spoke English at home and had employment experience. Conversely, mothers speaking a language other than English at home had significantly higher PEI scores than those who speak English at home. This table shows the PSQ and PEI scores by the provision of appropriately customized care in response to 4 different risk factors. The mothers who received appropriately customized care in response to mental health risk had significantly greater satisfaction with the care provided than those who did not receive appropriately customized care. However, the mothers who received appropriately customized care in response to smoking risk reported significantly lower enablement than those who did not receive appropriately customized care. There was a tendency for customized care in response to domestic violence risks to be associated with a higher parent enablement. Customized care in response to drugs and alcohol risk was not associated with parent satisfaction and enablement. So ordinal logistic regression was performed to test the association between customized care in response to mental health risk and parent satisfaction, as well as between customized care in response to smoking and domestic violence risk and parent enablement, while accounting for significant socio-demographic characteristics. The result in this table showed that the total PSQ score was positively associated with appropriately customized care in response to mental health risk. The strength of this association increased slightly after adjustment for potential stratification confounders, which are geographic areas and maternal parity, that decreased after the inclusion of selected socio-demographic fixed factors. Regarding parent enablement, after adjusting for stratification confounder, the strengths of the association with smoking risk-related customized care decreased slightly, while the strengths of the association with domestic violence risk-related customized care increased. After the inclusion of the selected demographic fixed factor, customized care in response to domestic violence was found to be significantly associated with increased parent enablement. So I'd like to move on to discussion part. So firstly, the findings from this study indicated that language spoken at home, which is non-English, was significantly associated with lower parent satisfaction, but higher sense of parent enablement. This result may be due to the issue relating to communication and nurse-client relationship. The several studies suggest that inability to understand the provider resulted in lower client satisfaction with the care received. The language difficulties have also been shown to be associated with service avoidance and perpetuating poor health outcomes. In other studies, home visiting nurses reported difficulties in communication and in building of relationship with culturally and linguistically diverse mothers. In contrast, mothers who spoke languages other than English at home had a higher sense of enablement as a result of participation in the program. Parent enablement is related to, but distinct from satisfaction. The PSQ measures the extent to which expectations relating to the process of delivery of care have been met, rather than whether there has been any achievement of specific health outcomes. However, PEI measures parents' ability to understand and cope with their baby and their own health and life. Mothers who spoke languages other than English might not have been satisfied with the care process against their expectations. However, they might have felt their ability and confidence in their health and life had improved. Regarding the relationship between customized care in response to mothers' risks and parent satisfaction and enablement. Number one, customized care in response to mental health risk was significantly associated with higher satisfaction. Mental health was the risk factor where the largest population, which was 69% of mothers, received appropriately customized care, compared to 47% for smoking, 48% for domestic violence, and 57% for drugs and alcohol risk. This significant association may be because the risk identification and disclosure were accurate, and customized care in response to the risk was appropriately provided by the nurses. The mental health risk is relatively common, and nurses are better trained to support mental health needs compared to other risks, such as domestic violence and drugs and alcohol issues. Number two, there was a tendency for customized care in response to domestic violence risk to be associated with greater enablement, and the regression analysis revealed that the significance of association increased when adjusted for confounding factors, which were language spoken at home, which is non-English, and non-employment experience. This increase seen in significance when adjustment was made for language factor is interesting, as it supports the notion that women who spoke a language other than English can benefit from this type of intervention, increasing their sense of enablement, particularly when given appropriately customized support in response to domestic violence risk. Number three, in contrast to the result related to mental health and domestic violence risks, the customized care in response to smoking risk was significantly associated with lower parent enablement. There might be a few reasons behind. First, smoking risk was identified based on maternal smoking status, but not partners or family smoking status. It's possible that some nurses provided smoking-related intervention based on the information or observation of other family members' smoking status. Second, indirect smoking is sometimes beyond mother's control. Provision of the information that smoking is harmful for herself and her baby, but no ability to fully restrict the exposure to the smoking risk might result in lower enablement. Number 4, we found no discernible impact of customized care in response to drugs and alcohol risk on parent satisfaction and enablement. This may be in part due to the ineffectiveness of the intervention in response to the risk. The previous research found that dealing with drugs and alcohol issue is one of the most challenging intervention for care providers, and sometimes they have negative attitude about the issues. Nurses are aware of information about definition, signs, and adverse outcomes of the risk, and available resources for individuals facing this risk through training sessions. However, little training focuses on strategies, approaches, or the hands-on guidance on how to work with client facing the issue. Thus, the content related to the risk might have been provided. However, the quality of the intervention might not have met the needs of the mother with the risk. This is my last slide. So based on the result from this study, customized care in response to identified risks and needs is recommended as essential to effective home visiting practice, together with fidelity to core components of the program. It underpins the theoretical concept of precision home visiting. Thus, we suggest that the sustained home visiting service model needs to be flexible enough to cater for purposeful variation according to family circumstances and needs, particularly risk factors, while maintaining a core of evidence-based practice. In addition, the nurses needs to be supported to further develop their capacity in both identifying families' risks and needs and competence in providing timely intervention and referrals for families in need of support in response to more challenging risks. We also recommend more research, particularly to investigate the specific care components, process, and practice that are required to address mothers and families' critical needs for ensuring effective outcome of the program. Furthermore, we are exploring nurse decision-making process, particularly focusing on how the nurses customize the care in the delivery of home visiting care. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kia. Your findings were really interesting. So we'll just take a minute, see if there's any quick clarifying questions. Otherwise, we'll take more questions at the end. Okay, not hearing any. We'll go ahead and pass it to Nicole.
There you go. Sorry, it took me a moment to find my mute button. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for letting us present today. I'm excited to share the findings our team had when we looked at profiles of social support and subsequent parenting stress. I want to acknowledge the co-authors on this work, Dr. Folger, Amerman, and Fry. So globally, as many of us know, home visiting programs are implemented with this overall goal of promoting positive health outcomes for families, particularly at-risk mothers and their children. So historically, the field has utilized a variety of different types of study designs to see if the interventions are doing what we hope that they're doing, that they're improving health outcomes. So these designs include randomized controlled trials as well as observational studies. And findings from this work have been really fundamental for us to be able to identify and develop the field's evidence base. Some important next steps for the field is to ensure that our efforts are leading to equitable outcomes. And to achieve equitable maternal and child health outcomes, it's really important to identify what works best for who, which is part of the precision home visiting framework. So a potential target for precision home visiting research is social support. So social support is one of the key ingredients in home visiting models. It's been a major focus in literature, both within home visiting and the broader literature, as we know that there's ample evidence that levels of social support are predictive of or associated with many key maternal and child health outcomes. For example, prior studies have found that poor social support has been shown to be associated with higher levels of parental stress, so more stress. Then in separate studies, investigators have also found that parenting stress can undermine nurturing caregiving, which can place children at an increased risk of poor emotional and behavioral outcomes. So in general, studies that have examined social support typically measure support using a validated instrument, and then they use the total support score as this continuous measure, or they use various cut points for high, moderate, and low support. While this approach does give us this high-level overview of how much support someone has, it really misses the heterogeneity of the different types of social support needs an individual has. So identifying these unique social support needs can really inform how to individualize services and have preventative efforts for families versus using some of the crude classifications of just looking at the low and high levels of support. And this is especially important as we think about social support because we know that there are various different types of support. So for example, we have tangible support. So the image on this slide is from a separate journey mapping project where we were looking at barriers to prenatal care. And this is an image of a mother, and it shows this really great example of low support. So she described to us that she doesn't have her own car, she doesn't have a driver's license, and also informed us that she doesn't know anybody who she could call that has a driver's license or a car. So this is an example of how really low tangible support can relate to some of the outcomes that we care about, such as access to prenatal care. Other areas that are important to consider includes emotional support. So this is related to having loving and trusted and empathetic relationships. We also look at support related to appraisal. So this is having a network of people that you can call or talk to get advice from or guidance. So I think this is really important for first-time parents. I remember the first time I had a baby and being able to call people up and ask, is this normal? How do I make my kiddo stop crying? Things like that. And so I think this is important for the moms that we serve. And then belonging. So this relates to acceptance and inclusion. So do you feel like you belong with your network of friends and your family and your community? Do you have people that invite you places, or having people that you could invite to go out to lunch with and things like that? So the objectives of our study were to first identify, are there unique profiles of social support versus just kind of looking at that total score of high and low? And then if we were able to identify those profiles, then to examine how social support profiles influences parenting support. So we had this overall hypothesis that we would find these unique social support profiles, and then that they would be differentially associated with later parenting stress. So using a retrospective study design, we examined existing data from mothers who were enrolled in the Healthy Families America or HANS Kentucky models. So in this study, we had approximately 2,000 mothers who were enrolled between the years of 2005 and 2020. So mothers were included in our analysis if they had data on prenatal social support, as well as parenting stress at around 6 months postpartum. So in this study, social support was measured using the ISL-12, which has 12 items. And then we measured parenting stress using the Parenting Stress Index short form, which includes 36 items. And so the parenting stress form was completed around 6 months after delivery. So to address the goals of our study, we first used latent profile analyses to identify profiles of social support. And so when we were running these analyses, you kind of put in how many profiles you want to see. So first you put in 2 profiles, 3, 4, and as high as you want to go. And you use model fit statistics to determine what number of profiles is the best fit for your data. After identifying social support profiles, then we estimated the mean social support score by each of these profiles. Then using adjusted linear regression models, we examined the association between social support profiles and subsequent parenting stress. And so the prenatal social support was considered to be the exposure in our variable, so what profile somebody is in, and then the outcome was parenting stress, and that was on a continuous scale. And then based on prior literature that has found marital status and maternal education and maternal race are associated with support and stress, we adjusted for those in our analysis. So based on model fit statistics, we identified 4 unique profiles of social support. Mothers were assigned to profiles based on which profile had the highest predicted probability for. After identifying these profiles, we then estimated the mean prenatal social support score for each class, and higher scores indicate more support. The max social support score on the ISL is 36. Mothers in the high support group had an average support score of 33. So you can see that on the left with the lime green avocado color. And then on the other end of the graph is the dark green color. And this is our moms in the low support profile. And so their average score was 18. The blue and pink bars on this graph represent moderate support groups. So looking at the mean score, it appears these groups are really similar because their means are both approximately around 24. However, when we look at how each profile answered the individual ISL questions, we can see that mothers in these moderate support groups look very different. So before I go into detail of all the differences between the groups, I really wanted to orientate you to all of the information on this slide because I know that there's a lot here. So first, each line that you see represents a social support profile. So the lime green is our high support group. The light blue, green, and the pink lines represent those moderate support groups. And then finally, that dark green line is the low support group. Then the y-axis and the table below the graph depict the average score for each of the 12 items on the ISL. The text above the table is just a shortened version of the ISL question. So with the ISL 12, it measures 3 domains of support. So on the slide, we grouped the questions by each domain. So first we have appraisal. And so appraisal questions for the ISL relate to, do you have somebody to share your worries with? Do you have somebody to get family advice from and things like that? Next is belonging. And so the way that the ISL measured belonging in this instrument is, do you have somebody to go on a trip with, to have a lunch date with? Do people invite you to do things? And then finally, the tangible support measures. So the questions are related to, do you have somebody that can help you if you're sick? Do you have somebody to call if you're stranded? So kind of thinking back to that cartoon on the last slide, that person who had really low tangible support, it's likely that they wouldn't have somebody to call because most of the people in their network didn't have cars either. So then finally, on the bottom of this slide, you'll see these percentages. And this is just the percent of the study population that was assigned to each class. So we have approximately 2,000 moms that were in this sample. So after identifying these profiles, we then examined what makes each group unique from one another. And so what we can see on this slide, so that lime green line, the one on the top, is the high support group has overall high support for all domains. They do have some dips in the belonging and the tangible support areas. Then at the bottom of the graph with that hunter green line, the low support group has overall low support. And we can visually see here that it's the appraisal domain that's really kind of pulling down their average score. And then they have fairly similar scores, a little bit lower, but pretty similar to the moms in the moderate group for belonging and tangible support. Next are the moderate groups that we see in the middle. So these are the pink and blue lines. And if you remember on the last slide that these two groups had the same mean total score, but we can see that they look very different. And so the moms in the pink group, so this is our moderate group B, they had fairly high levels of appraisal, but then we can see that they have low levels of belonging and their tangible support look pretty variable. And then finally, the moms in the light blue group had generally overall moderate support in all domains. When compared to the other moderate group, they had lower appraisal scores, but better perception of belonging and still variable tangible support scores. So I think it's really interesting looking at this graph, knowing that the pink and blue lines, they had those similar means, but we can see that they are very different. And so when studies would base results or risk on your average score, they would consider these two groups to be approximately similar. So the second objective of our study was to examine how the profiles of social support influence parenting stress. So the rows in this table are sorted by the highest to lowest stress based on the mean parental stress score. So we can see that those in the moderate group B, so this was the pink line on the last slide, that they have the highest average parental stress score. Then this is then followed by the low support group, and then the moderate support group, and then moms that were in the high support group had the lowest parental stress scores, meaning that they had the least stress. The next column displays the scales percentiles based on the raw scores. And these are percentiles from the instrument. They're not based on the study data that we have. And the higher percentiles are related to higher stress. So just looking at these two columns, we can visually see that similar to prior studies, that low social support is associated with higher parental stress. Then the final two columns of this table are results from our adjusted regression. So after we adjusted the model for maternal characteristics, the results demonstrate, again, lower support is associated with higher stress. So for example, when you compare moms that are in the moderate support group B, so that's the first row, to moms in the high support group, when we look at their adjusted beta estimate, it's 10. So what this means is they scored 10 points higher on the parental stress measure than moms in the high support group. And similarly, the moms in the low support group scored around 8 points higher, and then the moderate support group A scored around 7.6 points higher. Then another thing that we did is just to see if these groups are different from each other. So are the scores for moderate B significantly different than A? Is low different than A? And is low different than B? And when we adjusted for multiple comparisons, we did not see a significant difference between these groups. So indicating that we're just seeing a major difference in parental stress when we compare the moderate B, low support, and moderate support A to that high support group. So in this study, we found, like prior studies before us, that higher prenatal social support is related to having lower levels of parenting stress. And it's really important for us to better understand social support, because we saw in this study that around 40% of our moms were either lumped into the moderate support or low support groups. I think one of the most interesting findings that we have from this study is the identification of the 4 unique social support profiles. So when we saw the slide with the graph depicting the various levels of support by profile, it's clear that moms have different areas of needs as it relates to social support. So when examining each profile, we saw that the greatest variation, though, was related to the appraisal domain. So in conclusions, findings from this study through examining social support profiles support the importance of and the need a precision home visiting approach so we can identify the unique needs of families we serve.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so then we will go ahead and move into the question and answer period and discussion session. You can either go off mute and ask your questions, or you can put some your questions in the chat. But to get us started, Nicole, I have one question for you. Beyond parenting stress, do you think profiles of social support will be important to consider for other maternal outcomes?
I think so. I think things that we think about a lot is maternal depression and anxiety. And so thinking about how social support may relate to some of those outcomes, I think would be interesting to look at. And so specifically thinking about appraisal and belonging is something that I would be interested in thinking about for depression and anxiety.
I have a question, Jill.
Yes, go ahead, Becky.
I'm just wondering, so it seems like the appraisal piece of the social support really stood out as being kind of the most important, perhaps. Did you sort of talk to home visitors actually from your study, or in the larger community you work with, to find out sort of what they're doing to promote appraisal? Kind of thinking with a precision lens to make sure that families are getting that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So these are some of the preliminary results we've had from the study, and now we are excited to present today to see the feedback that we have from your group of how to use this data to move forward. So I think that would be a really good approach to better understand some of the results that we have and to try to see what they're doing in the field to address appraisal.
Hello, hey, Nicole, I have a question. Thank you for your talk. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so since you measure social support, and did you have data on the source of social support and the quality of the social support? So I was asking this question considering the importance of those intimate partner relationships in terms of looking at the outcome of the study. So is there those type of measure how good the relationship in those partners is safe, stable, and nurturing?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So with using the ISL, we don't have that granular level of data, but I think it's really good to consider where that support is coming from. Partly because, and I guess like how that support might change over time as well with partners and different networks, because we know that it is variable throughout pregnancy and postpartum. And so we don't have that data for this study, but I think that would be an interesting forward direction to think about the source of support and how this relates to some of these outcomes.
Thank you. Yeah.
And Nicole, kind of building on that, how do you think profiles of social support might change from prenatal to the postpartum period?
And some of the other work that I do working with moms with substance use, when we've looked at how social support changes over time, we find with that population and that we have, I guess, relatively good social support during pregnancy, but it tends to drop off after after baby is born. So I think future studies may be looking at the trajectories of how social support changes for moms and home visiting would be really interesting to know if there's certain time points where we should target interventions and give that extra boost to make sure that we're not having these big drops. I haven't looked at this yet, so I don't know if we would see the drop off in this data, but if I were forced to guess what happens, that's what I think would happen with the drop off.
Okay, Kia, there's a question for you in the chat from Jess. So did MESH further tailor the supports it offers based on findings from your study?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very important question. So yes, I think, I believe these findings inform the strategy for the further improve the quality of care in the delivery of sustained home visiting in the MESH program. So these findings suggested that customized care is very important for the effective intervention. So especially the training, the focusing on strategies and approaches or hands-on guidance and how to work with clients facing specific issues, especially like more challenging issue will be provided. Yeah, and also at the same time, it's important for the nurses to gain better skills in culturally sensitive practice in relation to meeting the needs of especially those who spoke language other than English, like those who have culturally and linguistically diverse background mothers.
Great, thanks. Other questions for our presenters?
Hi, my name is Izumi from Washington State. I have a question for Kie. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm wondering about the, maybe you may have mentioned during your presentation, but the two groups of inappropriately customized care. So this group is, consists of two groups, which to me seem to be very different group. So one had risk factor, but did not receive intervention. The other one did not have risk factor, but received intervention. Did you see like a difference in these two groups? That's my first question. And the other question is, sorry, I may be taking up too much time, but what I hear from like home visitors is that oftentimes risk factors are not captured by the measures we use. So they find like subtle differences, and maybe you mentioned this during the presentation, but so are we just not capturing the risk factors enough? If so, I feel like that is appropriately customized care. Yeah, how do you address that problem? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Izumi, for raising a very important point. Yeah, in relation to customized care in response to families' risks, we categorize the mothers into only two groups, whether they received appropriately customized care or not in this study design. But yeah, as you mentioned, I think we may need to unpack the group further to see if any differences, because we put the group A and D together as appropriately customized care and B and C as inappropriately customized care. Yeah, however, yeah, there may be certain differences between especially B and C. Yeah, so thus we further investigate to find the more effective care process which can optimize the client outcomes and the benefits of mothers and families. That is for the first question. And second one regarding the risk factors. So risk factors were identified at the screening survey at the commencement of the program, and also the information information disclosed during the course of home visit by using the nurse record. Yeah, so of course, I mean, the especially very sensitive risk factors are most probably not disclosed from the very beginning of the program, but in the course of the program, like by building the trust relation or therapeutic relationship with between client and nurses, and then normally the mothers start disclosing the risks. So we include those risks to categorize this appropriately customized care or not. But it's related to my the limitation to the study. Yeah, there might be some more risks which were not disclosed, but more challenging risks are not disclosed by the mothers or families. So yeah, that is a limitation of the study. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Just curious if anybody else has other thoughts about the question about screening for risk factors, and if anybody has learned anything related to that question. Anne?
So I think this is related to that. And what it has to do with is the difference. If you take the pool of families who are known to be positive for a risk factor, you can determine that lots of different ways. And in some cases, you determine it because the family actually is pretty upfront with it and reveals to you that they're either already getting services or they have in the past or whatever. And when we've looked at MIS data to look at home visitors' practice behavior regarding discussion of such risks, we found that home visitors are a lot more likely to discuss a particular risk when the family is already receiving services or taking some other action. And so, you know, you could argue that perhaps the screening tool gets at whether or not service delivery is in play or has been. I just wanted to make that distinction for even bifurcating those who are classified as at risk and how the scenario of practice might be very different for those two subgroups. That's all I know.
Okay, great. Another question for Kia. So your study indicated that customized care in response to domestic violence could improve the sense of enablement, especially for those who spoke non-English languages at home. At the same time, your previous study indicates that home visiting nurses were hesitant to provide care in response to domestic violence. What could be the reasons for the nurses' hesitation to provide care related to domestic violence? And what do you think are the possible ways to improve the care and intervention in response to domestic violence risk?
Thank you very much for your good question. First, regarding the reasons why home visiting nurses were hesitant to provide care in response to domestic violence compared to other risks, we did not investigate them in our study. However, domestic violence is considered a more sensitive issue for nurses to address and intervene compared to other risks such as smoking and mental health. So some previous study found that nurses tended to feel discomfort and a pessimism when it came to addressing domestic violence issues. They also feel fear of like offending clients or providers' personal experience with the views or an affairs or of breaking the trust relationship with clients. Those have been identified as forming barriers for the nurses to encounter domestic violence in practice. However, as home visiting care is normally provided at home and a very well-established nurse-client relationship, so that's why there might be more chances for nurses to observe or know of mothers' risk related to domestic violence. Thus, home visiting nurses hold very significant opportunity to support in preventing mothers from adverse experience related to DV. So regarding possible ways to improve the care in response to domestic violence. So as I already mentioned a little bit, the training, the focus is on very hands-on guidance on how to work with client-facing issue is essential. And another point is to establish support system for nurses to provide effective intervention or referrals for the mothers. So collaboration with other professionals such as social workers, mental health nurses, child protection workers in the team is very important. Recently, I had a chance to interview home visiting nurses regarding the care with challenging situation, such as domestic violence, and I found that involvement of social workers is very helpful in terms of supporting the mother with challenging issue, as well as supporting the nurses emotionally and mentally to continue working with the client with more challenging issues. So our nurses have their needs to be listened and to share their very tough experience with in their services. Thus, like case review together with other professionals and the clinical supervision are also very much effective to support nurses to improve the care. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have about 5 more minutes. Just want to open up to additional questions. Okay, I have one more. Oh, Cynthia.
Sure. So thanks to both of you, really excellent presentations. And because our session is focused on contextual factors as moderators, and we can never explain everything we observe in our studies, I guess, Nicole, I'll ask you first, are there any sort of contextual factors beyond those you could capture that you wish you had had, that in a future study, if you had all the money in the world, that you would love to tap into?
Yes, I would love to have all the money in the world. I'll start with that answer for research. I think, getting to one of the questions somebody had asked before is where that social support is coming from. I think it would be interesting to see if the support is coming from the other parent, if there's another parent in the home or somebody really close. I also think trying to think about maybe some more modern measures of social support. And so when we look at the ISL 12, like some of the questions are good, but having somebody to go on a lunch date with maybe could change. Do you have somebody to FaceTime with in the moment of when you're having stress and things like that? And so those are different things that I've thought about to see if we can measure support in a different way. And for contextual factors, I think maybe thinking about other things where we have different social support profiles, and does the relationship between these profiles and outcomes vary by other risk factors? And so I think it goes to the presentation before me. What would this look like among moms that have the history of domestic violence or substance use and things like that? So I think kind of looking at some of those moderators would be important too.
Thanks. Yeah, I was also thinking about even moderators, maybe not even at the individual level, but more at the organizational level or community context level, which we often don't measure or don't take fully account of in our work, which is just hugely, hugely challenging. So thanks for sharing that.
Hello, hi. I have a question for Nico. Thank you for your answer to my question on you don't have the source of and the quality of the social support. I noticed Robert Emmerman is your co-author in this presentation. He also published Promoting Parenting in Home Visiting BACE Analysis of Family Foundation. He measured all those partner violence issues, and I wonder that data source could be a potential source to replicate your study, looking at the source and the quality of the social support in intimate relationship. Thank you.
I think that's a really good idea. I think he's on the call today, but I think I'll definitely follow up with him to see if we can get access to some of that data. I see that he just came off of mute, so he might have an answer for that better than me.
Yeah, when I hear my name, my ears perk up. What? I was trying to hide back here. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's just sort of an interesting general issue as to where all of these data come from. Nicole's study comes from measures we've collected in Every Child Succeeds over the years. There are several thousand moms and the data set that she looked at, and all those measures were collected really by home visitors. And then the case study with Family Foundations was the externally funded, NIH funded study, a much smaller sample, but a much more sort of in-depth sort of measurement opportunity as a result. We did actually give the ISL, we gave the full ISL, which I think is 48 items in the case study. And like you said, we did have the measures of intimate partner violence. So I think that's a great idea. It wouldn't overlap with Nicole's sample. That would be the only sort of limitation, but that's a great idea.
Thank you. I want to briefly mention in health psychology book, Chris Duncan Shutter from UCLA contribute a chapter related to pregnancy outcomes. She highlights the source and the quality of social support really mean differently. We need to consider those. That's an old book chapter. So I really appreciate this conversation. Hopefully we can follow up. I think this is important for this country to looking at the role of home visitation in terms of safe, stable, nurturing relationship. You know, there's maternal death due to suicide, homicide, drug overdosage. This is the broader issues behind this discussion. Thank you for this wonderful conversation and the future follow-up.
Okay, well, there was one more question, Nicole, in the chat, which was there consideration of whether concepts of social support vary by culture?
I think that's a really great question. My background is in anthropology, so when I saw that come up, I really appreciated that thought. We didn't look at it in this study, so I'd have to talk to my collaborators to see what types of data that we would have related to culture and how that's measured, to see if we can see if that's potentially a moderator or how it would vary these different profiles.
You know, the ISL
Bob,
is,
did you come up? Okay.
the ISL is, I know, has been translated into a number of different languages and tested with different groups, which is not exactly the same as the question, and namely that our cultural sort of views and perspectives on social support are important in understanding the findings. So that's a good point.
Okay, well, we are right at time. I just wanted to thank both of our presenters for sharing their findings with us today. And thank you all for attending and asking some really great questions.